Good morning. Hello, everyone. I'm Kathryn from the Sewing Studio at Lady Lake and the Sewing Studio Fabric Superstore. Thank you so much for joining me today. Listen, I want to talk to you about this awesome little project. Okay, so the holidays are coming and there's always a need to have guests over, and you're doing dishes and you're washing and drying, and some things you just want to quickly put on, hand wash and dump it up over there, champagne glasses, wine glasses, etc. So you can, you need a drying mat. Well, why have a simple, boring drying mat when you can do something awesome instead? So today I want to talk to you about taming the pile, the fuzz, the fur, the stuff that is on it. All right, so from up top, Mr. Eric, we're going to be the master of the pile, okay? So what we need to do is, first of all, talk about what is pile. Well, pile is the thread loops that are on your fabric, all right? I know sometimes it's like, don't assume I know something when I don't necessarily know it. That's what pile is. All right, so first of all, you're going to need water-soluble topping. This is the picnic blanket. All right, so water-soluble topping looks like this. It's just like a thin saran wrap kind of a feeling, kind of a thing. It just basically is going to peel off at the end. Your design pulls right out of it, and if you have any left, like in the circle of the letter O or something, it will just easily go away with a wet Q-tip. So you're going to need water-soluble topping. Why do I call it a picnic blanket? Well, as I said, pile is the loops of your fabric. So this needs to hold down that pile so that the stitches won't sink in. So it's like a picnic blanket on the grass. It's holding down that pile so that your stitches will stay up nice and pretty. Another thing you can do to manage pile is try applique. Okay, when you have applique, you're using fabric on top of another fabric. So here in this drying mat, I have my pink fabric on top of my drying mat. Now, applique uses that fabric, and fabric is very easily going to cover that pile up so that your stitches will stay visible on top of your fabric and they don't get eaten by the pile. All right, something to look out for is avoid satin columns. Pile is going to always find a way out. In other words, grass will grow. So with a satin column, it's back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Well, underneath of there, eventually your threads will come growing up out of that satin column. So you want to try and find designs that have a little bit more of a mash down as it goes along, as opposed to just to the left, to the right, to the left, to the right. Okay? Another thing to look out for is slow down. Your machine has to work a heck of a lot harder when it's going over pile, particularly if you have a high pile item, like a really super plush towel or these drying mats. So you want to slow down. Take it easy. Let your machine do the work that it needs to do. This is a bit like, for your machine, remember your machine is kind of like you're mowing an out of control field of weeds. You don't want to just plow right into it. You need to slow it down so that your machine can do what it needs to do, okay? All right, another thing to think about, if I can get my papers open, is to increase your embroidery foot height. Okay, not all machines will do this. However, on this particular project, this particular mat is quite thick. There's a height issue here. So what happens is when the embroidery foot goes along, it can smoosh this fabric, okay? So I needed to increase the height of my foot so that there was no smooshing going on. From up front, Mr. Eric? Okay. See, you can even see on the edge of the applique here, there's a puffiness to it. So it's not just like a thin layer of cotton. When you have something like this that's quite thick, you really should think about increasing that foot height so there's no smoosh factor. Okay, so increase your embroidery foot height. No smush factor. With your high pile, you increase it so you have no smushy fabric around. All right, another thing to think about is float your item, don't hoop your item. Bulky things don't really hoop at all. It's incredibly hard, and not only that, but on things with a pile, you can leave a hoop burn. So what do you mean by float, don't hoop? Okay, so what you need to do is you'll hoop your stabilizer. So the stabilizer is the only thing in your embroidery hoop. Then you'll pin your item to that stabilizer, okay? All right, that's it. So that was it for just some like basic tips and tricks. Let's get into what I actually did when I did this particular dry mat, okay? All right, so on this particular one, I have two mats, but on this particular mat, I saved an outline from my IQ designer, an outline of my font. So I love this DRY font. It looked kind of retro and 50s for me, kind of like this diner kind of a look. So I saved the outline of my letters. Once I had saved the outline of my letters, I went to my built-in shapes so I could get this little frame. Once I had my frame, I first had to save it as a placement stitch line, and then I had to save it as a tack down stitch line. All right, so then on these circles, this is really cool. I'm gonna actually lift this up so Eric can get a close-up on it. On these circle fills, it is the circle at regular 100%, and then at 50% of the size. So it kind of like looks like a life preserver that you might see on a ship, in that you have teeny circles at half their normal size and then the circle fill at its regular. So by overlapping those fills, it creates its own unique texture. Okay, so once I had those circle fills, I had to then assign a satin stitch to my letter. So on the outline of these letters, I wanted it to stand out a bit more, and I could just assign that in IQ. Then I needed to assign my outside finishing stitches as a satin stitch. I don't like just satin stitches though. Again, your pile can grow through them. So then after I had that satin stitch, the last thing that I added was a bean stitch. So again, up close, Mr. Eric, on this particular one, if you look at it, you can see that right in the middle of that satin stitch, there's a straight stitch that is perpendicular to the satin stitches. I love adding that bean stitch to my appliques. I think it just totally takes it up a notch. And when you add that, make sure you lengthen the stitch so that it is nice and visible and bold. So I like to do a 3.5 length on my final bean stitches. Okay, so that's one idea for the drying mat, but then I had another idea. Not only can you do a simple little mat that says dry, but you might be able to do a dog mat. And not only can you do a dog mat, but once you've got your dog mat, you could make it double-sided. So I have my gray fabric on the back and it's covering up all those ugly understitches, and then I have my gray fabric for my dog bone on the front. Now, if you look at this particular mat, it's really pretty on the front, but then when you flip it over, it would be like if you bought something at a regular box store. When you flip it over, you are looking at your embroidery stitches on the back, and it's not quite as pretty. So let's go over this double-sided applique. So when you have this one, I used my Embrilliance Stitch Artist because it has this lovely bone shape in it. It's a built-in shape. So once I picked that bone, the first thing I needed to do was assign that bone as a single stitch so that I could use that as my placement stitch. Then you need to do the double stitch so that it can tack down that fabric. Once you've got your fabric tacked down, I added lettering. This particular font is called Bauhaus. It's a built-in font in Embrilliance, and it's really round, and I just think it's really cute. So once you've got your lettering, your dog's name, this is actually my little sister's dog's name, you add a third double stitch as the tack down for your back fabric. So I've stitched my placement stitch, my tack down stitch, and my lettering. Then my hoop comes off of the machine and I pin my fabric to the back, and I use my tack down stitch for the back fabric. You're going to trim off the back, trim off the front, and your final thing that you do is the satin stitch. Now again, once I've done that satin stitch, for me, I love to add a 3-pass in Embrilliant Stitch Artist. I like to have it go 3 times. In other words, 1 and 2 and 3. Then the next stitch, 1 and 2 and 3. That's a 3-pass. So I love to add a 3-pass with, again, a 3.5 millimeter bean stitch as my finishing stitch. So from up front, Mr. Eric, if we look at that up close, you can see that there is a skinny little straight stitch line on top of my satin stitch line. And again, that's at a 3.5 millimeter. And while you're right there, Mr. Eric, I just want to show you guys, it's so easy when you're done just to take your water-soluble topper and pull it right off. See how easily that came off? So it goes down easy, it protects your stitches, keeps them sitting up nice and pretty. And this simple little drying mat that I got at the dollar store is now taken up and personalized and customized for my sister, or it could be for a friend, or it could be for yourself. Whatever you like to do, it's not so boring and plain. Thank you so much, everybody. I hope you learned something about taming your pile. Don't forget, you can always visit us on the web at www.sewing.net. We have our store in there, we have our classes in there, we have our blog in there, and we also have a YouTube channel. So if you search for the Sewing Studio Fabric Superstore on YouTube, it's the purple dot. Go check us out for videos there as well. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.